So the goal today is essentially, I just want to go over the basic outline and structure of the military. And especially if you've served before, you have a lot of experience in one little niche of experience and at a certain time from what that culture is. But maybe there's a possibility that you haven't thought about some of the larger influencing factors. Well, I think when we talk about military culture, what we're really talking about is a frame of, we all have frames how we view the world. And when we talk why it's important to understand military culture is because once someone has served in the military, it really does effectively change the way they frame and view the world. Right? There are certain things that change, and that it takes a lot of work to undo that stuff.
Were you in the military?
Yeah. Let me give you a little background about me. So I've been in the Army for about 13 years. I'm actually currently serving as a battalion, a brigade chaplain here in Los Angeles. I have a field artillery unit based out of Burbank that I chaplain with, and then but I was enlisted for a long time. I was a staff sergeant. I was an intel analyst, and been all over the place. So I have a lot of friends in a lot of different worlds, and but I currently work at USC School of Social Work has a military social work program, and you'll meet Estelle. She's in our program now.
No, we have met her.
Oh, you already met her.
Yeah.
This is our third training,
great.
so we've had a couple trainings already.
Okay, great. So essentially, what this is so in that program we have as part of where that program came from was a Department of Defense grant. So in the School of USC's social work, we have a Center for Innovation and Research for Military and Veteran Families. So this is we operate off a big deal, a few $1 million Department of Defense grant that we help educate and then also provide curriculum to train social workers how to specifically be trained to work with military clients, especially with the drawdown and the thousands, literally hundreds of thousands of soldiers coming home, and nearly 1% of the population who served in war in the last 13 years. We just have
how many years?
13 years. In the last since September 11th,
Oh, okay.
1% of the population has served in that conflict, which is different than in past, right? Vietnam, we were talking much higher percentages of people who had experienced the war because they didn't have a choice, right? It was either draft or dodge, right? It has created all sorts of differences, and one of that is that the majority of people have very limited experience with military culture.
Like myself.
Right, sure. Like you may not even know of that.
No, I didn't know there was a subculture of.
Sure, and it's not, you just don't know, right? You didn't have the experience. And some people, and then vets who have served also feel removed because maybe you know some other vets at your age, but you often feel very disconnected probably from this generation who served, right? May or may not know anyone who served in the most recent wars. So one of the impetus for this is to give you a little idea of the scope of the military and the culture, and then some of the large looming forces, cultural forces and frames that the military affects people. And that way, especially when you're working with your clients, these are ingrained. And all the things that we'll talk about is the same thing that you experience, that I've experienced, these cultural norms that affected you, and now probably very realistically still shape your life in some tangible way, even 60 years after you've served. And what's really interesting also is that one of the things we're seeing now is that a lot of the mental health challenges that we once saw coming back from Vietnam or World War II, there wasn't the resources to be able to talk about those. And now that they're retired or sitting there, all of the coping skills that they had used to function are starting to go away, and now they now they don't have a job to distract them anymore, and suddenly they're having flashbacks. And they're like, oh my gosh, I'm living in a war now. What happened? I used to be fine. And so it's good to have an awareness of this, because you may be working with clients, especially if you're going to be working with guys who've been in war. They might that might be a really necessary part of their, especially in terms of phases of life development. As someone closes in their waning years, a lot of times they're trying to get closure to things that they haven't had closure in, and they have a lot more time to do that. And so very realistically, you may be part of that. And some of those are some of the moral complications of war. Realistically, war creates a lot of weird, moral, horrible situations where there is no right. And the best thing you can do is just the best thing that you can do. And it's hard to piece those things together, and sometimes it can take a long time in a community and to figure out and to be okay with things you've done, to be okay with the things that other people did, and to learn how to process what that experience means for your life here and all of that. So realistically, you could be part of that. And that's...
So you're saying they've come back from the war, whatever war, they've worked, and then they retire, and then it hits them.
Sure, yep.
That's what
Some of the mental health symptomology actually come back because they, for 40 years they worked.
They didn't let their mind
Heck no, get
go
over
there.
that push, right? And in fact, some of the mild symptomology of trauma, things like anxiety, right? A palpable sort of, you would do things, it would actually have positive coping skills, a little aggression, a lot of things that actually might work out well for you if you were in a working world, right?
Right.
You might actually be more productive, but it's actually the symptoms of something else. So, suddenly you take away the thing that you had, that you used to deal with it, to lose yourself in work, and now suddenly you're like, wait a minute, I'm having all these feelings and thoughts that I've never had before. Just something to be aware of. So today I want to, the other reason why is because the impetus for this course is that, we have all of these people coming back from war. We have a small, they did a big study in 2011 at Hogue, and they found that of the majority of veterans who were receiving care of any kind, mostly mental health, but receiving care, were dissatisfied with the care they received. So that's a pretty large statement, actually. So they found that one of the things that they missed was that they didn't feel like the other person got them or could understand them. I think one way of understanding that is that disconnect, right? They feel like, well, you don't understand what I went through.
You weren't there.
You weren't there, but also just the lack of awareness of military culture and what, you don't have to be here so early, or like, you don't have to, everything doesn't have to be perfect, or you don't have to keep your gig line or something. It's like, what? Right. Yes, but there's still, to understand where they're coming from, often, right, the age-old adage, before you can help someone get to the next place, you got to figure out where they are. You got to start with where they are. So that's kind of what we want to do. So today I want to go over roughly like an overview, some of the reasons for some of the people who join, then a little historical background. I may breeze through that. It's a historical background. And then some of the actual significant points of military culture. Some of the frames that affect how we work, how once you serve the military. You'll probably really relate to this, and feel free to chime in, and any of you guys if you have the personal experience. So the Department of Defense is obviously to protect and provide security for our country, and specifically military forces. The goal is supposedly of our military is to protect peace, and so that's the goal of our military. The scale of the military is massive. Especially in our country, it's a significant part of our percentage of our GDP, and we have a massive amount that goes into defense. As you can see, $615 billion is expected, which is noticeably down from 2011.
Wow.
Yeah, billion. So why that's also important is to understand that we have bases. The military has a presence in
57 countries, isn't it?
More than that. Well, it depends on what you would classify as a presence, right? We have someone in almost every country, right? But we have an actual significant base or somewhere to go. I have it on the slide later on, but in a lot of different countries. And so there's a scale. Sometimes when we think of the Department of Defense, we think of like only the Army or only, but actually it consists of lots of different organizations. We have the Army, we have the Navy, the Marines, and the Air Force. And these are 4 major branches. And then since September 11th, in a time of war, the Coast Guard falls under as well. So then you get the Coast Guard. You can see this is the rough breakdown, Department of Defense. This is all a breakdown of where this comes from. Yeah, so essentially the military is the largest employer, right? 1.4 million men and women are employed on active duty. And then it almost doubles when you add in National Guard and Reserve. And then another third or half of that is added when you add in civilian support. So all the people who like fix everything and who aren't in uniform, but they do essentially, jobs that other people in the military could do. So you're talking about a massive machine, essentially. A lot of people are involved in this. The only other scaling is even close is the second, the Chinese military, but that's because there's so many people. But it's still not even close from how much we spend and our infrastructure and what it looks like. And, we have places specifically here in LA. I don't think we have a slide here, but there are literally thousands of buildings and structures all over, specifically here in LA. We have tons of military bases. We have March Air Force Base just north, right? Fort Irwin on the way to Vegas. Camp Pendleton, right on the way down to San Diego.
Yeah, there's a recruiting center down in San Diego.
We got a recruiting center. But now, let's talk about all the National Guard and armories, right? We have, there are so many of them. In Van Nuys,
Yeah.
I was just, where you're located, right down the street is an armory. Right by Bob Hope Airport is actually where my headquarters, my unit is
That
based
was
out.
where I worked,
Oh, yeah?
right next to the cemetery.
You remember that you see the gun out there? You
Yeah,
know that
yeah,
gun?
yeah, yeah,
There are
yes,
tons.
yes.
Yep. There are. You probably see little National Guard posts all over. I don't know the exact number, but I bet there's probably 12. I don't know, a lot of them. We have March Air Force Base. I said that Ellis, which is in this area. You have it's not Ellis. It's out in Riverside. There's one out there. Anyway, there's a lot of Air Force bases. There's LA Air Force Base, which is full-on Air Force Base, just right next to LAX.
405.
Yeah, right there. And the 105 in El Segundo. You have a lot of military presence here in Southern California. In fact, in the tri-state area, Los Angeles, San Diego, and Orange County, there's more veterans than anywhere else in the country.
And then if you talk about the Coast Guard with all the placements.
Yeah, absolutely. You took Seal Beach, you have Navy Peace.
Marine Del Rey has
Yeah.
a unit there.
Yeah, we
Santa
have,
Barbara.
that's right. It just keeps, we have a large population of military. So they estimate that we're probably going to see in the next 30 or 40,000 more veterans coming back to Los Angeles in the next few years as the military draws down. So they're only going to increase. So the idea of having people be aware of military culture and the factors of affecting this, and not just think when they see, veteran PTSD, oh gosh, you don't know anything, so you're like, I've only seen the news, and I know the VA's having problems. Instead, to actually be more educated, know kind of what's happening, and especially for a big city like Los Angeles, to be aware of the factors that are affecting us, right? What is our role as a community and your role as care providers in that care process, right? We send people abroad, what is our role in caring for them, and how do we take responsibility for that, and what do we do? So the military is massive. The scale of it is huge. I mentioned this before, there's about 5 branches, 4 main ones. Coast Guard falls under the Department of Defense in times of war, but then once we are no longer at war, it will return to supportive.
Homeland Security.
Yeah, I think Homeland.
When I was in, it was the Treasury Department. They've since converted over to Homeland Security.
Mhm. And then it falls under Homeland Security. Yeah, I think it.
And wartime, well, World War II, Vietnam went under the Navy Department.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happens now. So each one of these has a reserve component. So there's Army Reserves, there's Air Force Reserve, Marine Reserve. And in the past, that meant you went 1 week a month, and it was, it's like you were a reserve force, and if the Army really needed you, or the Air Force really needed you, or whatever your branch was that you were reserve, you'd be called up. They would need you, but they never did. I mean, you're in reserves. When I joined in September 2000, no, in February 2000, and my recruiter said, the National Guard has never been called up in 50 years. It's amazing. That's great. They're going to pay for your college. You're going to learn all sorts of, you're going to learn
awesome.
discipline. It's going to be great. And then my first week of college, September 11th happened, and I was like, somehow I don't think that's going to be the same anymore. Suddenly everyone's getting phone calls. Hey, we're leaving in 2 months. You're like, what? That's not what I'm in college. Shoot. Wait, are you serious?
So you got drafted then?
Well, technically it's not a draft, right? Because
It's volunteer.
yeah, you already signed up for the military, so you just didn't realize that you'd actually be used. I actually was in school, and all of my friends went, but I didn't go. I was in the rear detachment, and then another time I got sent to. I moved here to go to seminary to go to be a chaplain, and my unit then delayed their deployment, so then I didn't go. And so there was a couple times where I never went to Afghanistan or Iraq, but I've been a lot of other places. So interestingly enough, I'm a rare breed, though. Most of us have all been. So it's interesting because why I say this is the Reserve National Guard didn't ever play such a big role, whereas they in this last 13 years they played, accounted for about half of the fighting force, which was significant, right? Because these are people who had jobs and family members. Just the other day I got a phone call that they're like, hey, how do you feel about going to Afghanistan? We need you. We need a chaplain. And my wife was like, and I was like, well, maybe I'm supposed to go. And she was like, my wife is 7.5 months pregnant, and I was like, maybe I'm supposed to go. And she goes, no, right? So she didn't sign up for me to be in Afghanistan, right? If I was on active duty, that would be, that's how it works. You don't get to say you knew coming on board. But because I'm not, families didn't necessarily sign up for this, right? They didn't sign up. And many of these soldiers and Marines and airmen were doing 1, 2, 3 deployments. In my unit alone, I think guys were gone for almost 4 years with that.
It's a long time.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, how do you, not just
Get
long
back
time.
to reality after being in a combat.
And what's the point in even, you come home for 6 months, what's the point of even trying to get close again? The guys would be like, well, it's going to take so much for me to work back into the family. Like, the kids barely know me. I'm going to try to, do all this stuff. You want me to start transferring the bills back over into my name if I'm going to leave in 3 months again? Nah. Right? So you extensively, push it out either on both sides so that by the time you're done, your wife or your girlfriend or whoever is at home is used to not having you around. Right? It's a natural process for people to just try to figure out on their own. And so now these National Guard Reserve people, not to mention employment, right? Trying to figure out how to come back and get a job, but you don't have skills. Your employment situation hasn't changed. You joined the Army because you wanted to add to your employment, but you just lost your opportunity to go to school. So now 3.5 years later, you're like, what am I going to do?
Why would you lose your opportunity to go to school?
Well, you were gone, so you couldn't be in school during that time.
Yeah.
Right, you couldn't be in school. So then you come home and maybe, now I'm going to go to school, but, I don't know what I want to do. What does this look like for me? You usually have to provide some, You need some sort of support to go to school. You can't just start
Yeah,
on your
yeah,
own,
to
right? You
have
get a
somebody.
family, and there's just a lot of what basically has happened is that it caused a lot of challenges, and even here in Los Angeles, on the side note, the National Guard and Reserve, there's a significant difference in there's like a fear for employment, right? Because employers, if they hire someone, they might be, if you're in the National Guard or Reserve, like, well, are you going to be deployed, or
I mean, they have
at the
to
very
let you
least
go every weekend, you know.
Well, 1
week
week in a month, right?
And you're supposed to get paid as well from the company.
Well,
I know when I worked at the post office, the guys that were in the reserve,
Mhm.
and they went away, they got paid.
Government, for sure.
Okay.
Sometimes private companies don't have to do that.
Okay.
It kind of, I'm not actually clear on whether the law actually mandates that they have to pay. It's,
But the post office,
Yeah.
if you did 4 years in the service and you start, you get extra points to get,
Mhm.
you know, when you go. And when you retire, they add that military time to your retirement, which is
Yeah.
awesome, you
Yeah.
know,
Mhm.
which
That's great.
they should,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah, same with the fire department, right? Guys who were in the fire department, when they got deployed, they got paid double, right? Because they got
Paid
continued
for-
to pay for what. And then
Well, that's good.
Right. So the difference between the Reserve and the National Guard is that the Reserve also has a duty to the state. So when I swore into the National Guard, I swore into, I pledge my due oath and diligence to the President, to Obama, and I also pledge to the Governor. And so that's the difference in the Reserve and National Guard. Reserve is just a reserve for the Department of Defense. They have no duty. Reserve they're not going to be called up for fires. You're safe on that part. But National Guard, you have a state mandate. So we are constantly doing trainings for evacuation and fire and on all these missions for in case there's an emergency, then they're going to call me in or something.
Does the National Guard have to go into boot camp?
Yep, so all of the training is the same. So in order, National Guard and Reserve and active duty all go through the same training, but I went through basic training, and I went through AIT, I was in training for, AIT is Advanced Individual Training, my school, and then I came home after 10 months, and then I just went 1 week in a month instead of to go to a unit, and now I full-time do that job. So that's kind of the difference. And if you're National Guard, the other difference is that National Guard units are all combat arms. So they're all field artillery, infantry. In general, they're combat support elements. They're all combat elements. So usually they're infantry or combat arms or field artillery or armor. Something that is, because most of the things that the state would need them for are
Riots. or
riots, and so they want guys who are
Ready.
Yeah,
Disaster relief, you know, some of that, right?
yep, yeah, all that is, and that would just be an additional training. So the Reserve are like the clinicians, hospitals, all the jobs that would go with those, support, lawyer, all that stuff is Reserve, usually Reserve components. There might be a few of that on the Guard side, but so here are all the service components. If you just look at the special forces, each of the units also has a special forces, and they go to advanced training for a few years. You have to sign up once you join in, and you go through a significant portion. Those are the Green Berets, SEAL teams, all of those. Marines, Special Ops, Delta Force, Ranger. All those are you go to additional training, go through, and you get a little tab, or you are an elite fighting person, right? You always do Special Forces in Afghanistan because they have beards. Where everyone else can't have beards, but Special Forces, they have their own command structure, and it's much more
Intense.
intense and not as they don't always fall in the military. I mean, the Army wouldn't like to say that, but they kind of do their own thing because they're a special operations unit. So they're just a summary. So there's 3 rough there's 3 general categories. There's active duty people who are in service, and there's reserve and National Guard, and then roughly you have the civilians. Those are the big ones that serve in the Department of Defense, if you can understand that. And then obviously you have veterans and people who have served. You know.
I didn't, which you said.
I was gonna say, so you have civilians.
Yeah.
Almost every mission, every training, they have a civilian who's usually prior military, but someone who's a subject matter expert in an area who will come in and train.
I get to go home at night.
Yeah, they're but in these last wars we lost a lot of civilians as well because there's no choosing. An IED kills everyone if you're traveling around with people. So who is in the military? Roughly, what makes up the military, if you can see, about almost 40% of what we talk about the Department of Defense is active duty. And these are people who live on bases, who wear their uniform. When I say active duty, I mean, every day is a duty day, so you wear a uniform, every day. I'm not active duty because it's during the duty day and I don't have my uniform on. Right? If I'm on a duty, I probably have it on, unless I have special permission. DoD civilian personnel, 20, about a quarter of the Department of Defense is civilians, and then about 30% are ready reserve or National Guard or reserve. So if that makes sense. And then you can see a little retired reserve, Coast Guard, standby reserve. This is more reserves. This is a rough breakout. So as you can see, the Army is obviously the largest part of the military. After World War II, we split off the Air Force and the Army to make more sense of it all. And as you can see, military red branch, Army is about almost half of all of the military. When we talk about numbers here, pure numbers, right? 2.5 million people. Air Force is about 20, a little over 20%. Navy is about 16%. Marines are about 12%, and then Coast Guard's 2%. So obviously most of the military is pretty young. It's a young person's game, right? You need young knees to run around, and if you're in the airports and you see guys in uniform and they look pretty young, usually it's because they just got out of basic and they're on the way to AIT, their school somewhere. They have shaved heads, and I just flew home for Thanksgiving and I saw all these guys who must have got a pass for Thanksgiving or something. They're like wide-eyed. We call them fuzzies because they don't have a rank yet. They just have a little Velcro patch with no Velcro on there yet, no patch. And they're like excited, eating tons of candy or something, little 19-year-olds who, just got out of training. They're all real skinny, wiry. It's a young, on average, on active duty, the average age enlisted is 27, and officers is about 34, 35. Roughly that's because of college, right? If you want to be an officer, you have to go to college, so there's going to be an age difference. And then in the reserve, it's significantly a little bit older, you can see, about half or 30 years or younger, and a much higher percentage of are over 41. And that's because in the reserve, oftentimes you serve on active duty. Most of the contracts are active duty, then you go to reserve after, right? So in my unit, about a third of the people have been active duty. Probably half. We're on active duty, because when you sign up, usually you sign in a 6-year contract, and it'll go 4x2 or 4x4. So you serve, depending on your bonus, you get 4 years active duty, then 4 years reserve after. Ethnicity. In large part, the majority of the military is white, because it reflects our population here, actually in the US as well. And interestingly enough, is that there's a much higher proportional percentage of African Americans than is reflected in the U.S. And interestingly enough, there's a pretty broad diversity in the military, right? Everyone does jobs. You hear very little about someone's race. There's not, other than guys joking around or whatever. Obviously that stuff happens, but in general, it's so mission focused that you're not as focused on race. And a lot of times you have, you know, a lot of cross-cultural experiences just based off the nature of your, you know, my basic training. There was this huge guy from Little Rock. It was this gang banger before he joined the military. He had all these tats of blood and stuff. He was like 6'6" and like 260 with no fat on him. He's like teetered around. And it was like, he was my bunkmate. And then another little, I was this.
Hopefully on the bottom.
Yeah, well, I actually was on the bottom. He's like, you go to the top. And I'm like, okay, fine. And then, you know, then we had another guy who was from South Carolina. There was 4 of us who hung out, and his dad was a Grand Dragon in the KKK. And he was like, I gotta get out of here and go to the military. Another guy who was El Salvador, but he lived here in LA and was from a super gang neighborhood, whatever, and joined the military. And then I was this white suburban kid from Indiana. We were all together and we're like, man, we would never be friends, would we? This is crazy, right? The military has a way of doing that. So anyway, this is roughly race, ethnicity. You can see gender-wise, obviously most of it is male. I'm sure you read the news in the last few months where they said women can now fight and be in the forces. I don't think that's actually going to affect that much. My personal projection, I don't think it's going to affect that much. The truth is, women have been fighting for a long time. It's just sort of like the rubber stamp that, you know, it's. I mean, I know very few women who were in Afghanistan or Iraq who weren't blown up or shot, who didn't fire their weapons. You know, it's the idea that now we're allowing them in combat is like, okay.
They've already been
They've been there for a while, and everyone's like, how do you feel about women being in combat? I mean, can she shoot? Same thing I thought before. You know, last year when I was in Afghanistan, that's how I feel. Education level, roughly the majority of enlisted, in general, roughly active duty and reserve demonstrate considerably higher levels of education. And I think one of the reasons for that is that the training is so heavily focused on it in the military. You have to just constantly go to training, always in training. Right now, just this year alone, I've been like almost a month of training where I have to go for a week or 2 weeks at a time. And it's rare that they're not calling me and saying, hey, you know, at least once, maybe twice a month, like, hey, can you go to this training for a week? And I'm like, really? How much training does a human being need? You know, it's like, wow, we really want more suicide trainer. You know, we need more train the trainer people. And it's just in the culture of the military. Right?
So what do you do for a living now?
So I work for USC SIR.
Work? Okay.
So that's my
income.
You work for what?
USC School of
Oh, yeah,
Social
yeah,
Work. Yeah, what I can give you my card if I was going to buy it. But in addition, I'm also a chaplain in the National Guard. So it's a constant tension, right? Because you have to live in both those worlds and say, can I go for a few weeks? But the reason I say that is because in general, education, because of that stress in training and education, and especially in terms of promotion, if you want to be promoted, the more college you have, the better, right? You get more promotion points and you'll be higher on the list. When I finished seminary, I wasn't a chaplain yet. Then I came out for like 2 years while I was in graduate school. I was top of the list in the state because I had all this graduate school experience. As an enlisted person, it was like, oh wow. So that's one reason why you want to continue to be in education, because you know it's valued. It's highly valued. The other thing that's really valued is marriage. Marriage in general is really highly valued in the military. It doesn't mean valued. When I say valued, I don't mean like, wow, it's so great that you're married. I mean like it's a financial incentive, right? Systemically, it's like, well, you should be married if you're gonna, you know, I get more money if I'm married, right? If I deploy, I get almost twice the amount if I'm married. You know, BAH, I get housing allowance, separation pay, family separation allowance, $150 a month. You know, all sorts of different pluses if I'm married. So a lot of people were like, well, I'm leaving. No, we've only been dating two weeks, but want to get married? And I always get, never fails. I just sent a bunch of my guys to Afghanistan a few months ago, and it never fails that I always get a few emails like, "Hey, sir, do you mind marrying us real quick? I know we leave Friday, but what are you doing Thursday night?" No, don't do that. Please don't.
Not unless you're in love and that's what you want, not for the money.
Yeah, well,
There's the people that do it.
You're 19, it's like, "Sir, it's an extra $1,000 a month." And I'm like, "Yep," but when she takes all of your money because you don't know her, it's going to be way worth more than $1,000 a month.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the divorce rate is actually statistically lower in the military. I think that's because it's actually valued to stay married because it's got more incentive, right? Than here in the civilian side, there's not as much incentive to stay married if you're fighting a lot, right? No one's going to pay you more usually to stay married. So it's an extra incentive, and I think that probably has an effect on it. But as you can see, marriage is often, given deployments or whatever, it's often very, very stressed. So, as you can imagine. Military, obviously we've been a country at war for a long time. We've been involved in tons of wars. Particular to note is, if you ever hear OEF, OIF, you've heard those terms? OEF, Operation Enduring Freedom, and Operation Iraqi Freedom. So September 11th happened, and then we went into Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan, and then we went to Operation Iraqi Freedom, OIF. And then most recently, we've called it Operation New Dawn in Afghanistan.
New what?
New Dawn, OEF2, New Dawn. I think there's an explanation. Yeah, see, Operation New Dawn. This is when we were back in Afghanistan and sort of started to.
So the Persian Gulf War, would that have been enduring freedom?
No, that's different. That is actually just the Persian Gulf War.
Oh, okay.
So this is before. Once we went to the global war on terror, then we broke it into different branches. We have
Got it.
Operation, I don't know what anyway, Enduring Freedom, OIF. So if you hear the term, we have a lot of OEF, OIF veterans. Are you OEF? I was an OEF 2, OIF 1. That's what they're referring to. Iraq or E, Afghanistan, Iraq. So one really interesting, so roughly they say, I think we're up to about 2.7 million have been deployed now at this point. Have been deployed to Afghanistan or Iraq in the last
2.7.
2.7. So, talking big numbers here. So why that's really interesting is that our technology has significantly increased from the times of World War II and Vietnam. We have armor. They drive around in MRAPs. They call them MRAPs. They're essentially huge up-armored Humvees with like this much armor. Yeah, it's just, they're serious, They flip over. That's about the only thing you can do to them. You'll see a massive explosion, and then someone will go, "Ding."
There she is.
Oh, that is
Cute you
You
look.
are cute.
Merry Christmas to you too.
so funny. That is a great skirt. Merry Christmas. So, 2.7 or almost 2.7, I think at this point, have been deployed. So, one particular really interesting note about that is that most of the people that we're working with here, now we're dealing with casualty rates we're dealing with mortality rates that are significantly lower now, which presents a whole different set of challenges. Because in the past, wounds that would have injured and killed soldiers, they're not getting those wounds anymore, right? They have armor all over them, and now they're being wounded and they're living, right? In the past, they would definitely died from a lot of these injuries. And now they're living.
Because it takes a lot to help them survive and try to live their lives.
Right. So what we're seeing is, this is just when we talk about. So as you can see, the casualties in Afghanistan, we got almost 1,700 in OIF, 4,400 in Iraq, but the wounded is roughly about 31,000 wounded. and this is, and over half of those are 24 and younger. These are young guys. This is like our future, thousands and thousands of, do the math out, that's like 16,000 people have lost over significant casualties. What that doesn't factor in is a lot of the invisible wounds, right? TBI.
TBI.
Is traumatic brain injury, right? And some of the post-traumatic stress. So when we talk about, we're talking about physical wounds, and traumatic brain injury is physical, right? It's where you are physically, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, but it's where an explosion, an IED happens, and your brain is physically moved inside, and it's, you can't see anything wrong with you, but, headaches, nausea, there's a whole litany of symptoms, and so it's something to be aware of that is also. So it presents a whole different, we just didn't, the truth is no one understood or had an awareness that it could be so complex, and that some people would be wounded and not die, right? We just didn't have, suddenly for the first time, we were bringing home, hundreds and hundreds of wounded people. In the past, they wouldn't have been wounded, we would have brought them home not alive. So that kind of, I guess, tees up, what are the frameworks that you can understand military culture that actually shape someone who's been in the military before? So you've sat in this class, no? Have you? No? Oh, I thought you were going to do another one. Great. So military culture essentially is unique, right? For a lot of reasons, but one particularly, it's that the military is governed, there's a rule and a law for everything. I mean, everything, there is something that is a rule for. We don't, sometimes if you have never served in the military, it's hard to understand that there is a rule for everything. Especially guys when they first get out, it's hard to understand that there's a rule and a law for everything. What I mean by that is that I know exactly how I'm supposed to act in this room because there are 16 laws, right? But first of all, I know that because of my rank, I know that I need to address you as ma'am or sergeant or sir or whatever it is. So I know there's a dynamic that way. I also know that I can't slouch, right? I can't put my hands in my pockets. Someone's going to get your hand in your pocket, right? There's a rule. Right? I know that who I can talk to, who I can't talk to. There are rules for everything. One example of this, right, is that there are, in the military, you can go to jail for cheating on your wife.
Really?
Yep. Straight up. So there's like rules that guide you, and it's really hard to sometimes communicate, but it's actually like a way of being where you're always asking yourself, okay, what's the rule?
Am I doing something wrong here?
Yep. Am I doing something wrong? Am I not? And most people who've been in the military will feel very uncomfortable if they don't know the rules. If they don't know what they're supposed to be, you get a lot of nervous questions like, well, when do I need to show up? Or, oh, anytime. Well, what does that mean? Help me out. I need a little guidance here.
And then there's double jeopardy where you do something outside, off base, get caught, deal with the local authorities, and you have to deal with the military afterwards.
Right, so you go get a DUI off the post, and they'll write you up on charges, and you'll get demoted, and then you'll also have to go to court, and you might even go to jail, and they'll say, yeah, do it to them. So there's that. Or one Sunday we had off, and a guy went for a run with his shirt off, and came back and just got so sunburned. And they gave him an Article 15, which is they take away his pay, and got him in trouble for damaging government property.
Himself?
Yeah.
Wow.
So if you can picture, that kind of gives you the picture of like that there are rules, right? You can and can't, doesn't matter, you can't do it, right?
You're their property.
Yep, and there's a sense of like ownership where there's another something wrong, but it's 24/7, right? You can't just take it off and just because I don't have the uniform on, nope. If this guy wants to talk to me this way, I have to say yes sir, yes sir, yes sir. I can file a complaint maybe, but not
It's not
a
gonna do
lot. It's like you submit to the system. This is how it works. So why do people join the military? This is a particular reason. Why did you join the military?
When
Did you
a
join?
buddy of mine in high school and I were very much into deep sea fishing, lived in Venice. And so we decided to get our obligation over with, learn seamanship, navigation, save money. And so we both joined for 4 years. And both of us realized about 6 months later, after boot camp, that this is not what we wanted to do.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. So
You were stuck.
right after September 11th, a lot of people joined. A lot. We had lines the day and day after. You know, I don't know if you ever seen pictures of people, just long lines outside of recruiting offices of people joining. You know, and then you know, they say, I want to fight for my country. You know, if they're going to attack us, I'm going to fight for my country.
Yeah.
And you know, you also had a lot of people, especially in a recession, you know, they were never short on finding soldiers because they needed to plus up and get people. And you know, we were in a recession, and so people couldn't get a job, and so you'd say, well, I want to join the military. The other thing is education benefits, right? There's bonuses. There's a lot of benefits to this. And the other one is the personal. You know, a lot of people joined because they want to get better, right? They are come from a bad background, or you know, a lot of soldiers from Bell, Compton, Watts, and they're like, I gotta get out of here. I gotta do something.
That's a
productive with
way,
my life."
method of getting out.
Absolutely, doing something productive. You know, it's better than trying to work at a grocery store down the street. That's not gonna help me much. I need to get out of here, learn discipline, and learn new skills, and be exposed to new things. And if I can do it, I can do it. If I pass the ESTA, I'm out. So, you know, the other one is, you know, travel a lot. Military, it's an opportunity for adventure, new experiences. Or in my case, my mom signed me up for the military.
Really?
Yeah, my mom, when I was young, she'd always say, you know, you need to be, I can always picture you being in the military. Her grandfather was a World War II, he's a bomber pilot. He was recommended for the Congressional Medal of Honor.
Wow.
Really?
He shot down as a bomber, shot down a kamikaze from the battleship.
Huh.
And anyway, loved, it was great, you know, like, and then I remember she said, no, I think you should join the military. You know, you have you need discipline. And I was like, what? Oh, I'm going to college with everyone else. She said, nope, you need discipline. And I was like, oh, you can't sign me up for the military. I'm going to college. She's like, all right, we have to interview with every one of them. And so I eventually interviewed and finally found Army National Guard at the time. I was like, all right, this sounds like it'll be okay. You know? But in my case, you know, it did. It was great. I learned a lot. After a year of being in training, I came back to college and felt like I was significantly older. And I could sit still in class and like, oh wow, like, you know, everyone else was like, man, freedom from mom and dad, and I was like, man, I've been free from mom and dad. I kind of want to go home. I like my parents now, you know. So a lot of people join the military for a lot of reasons, and it definitely adds to the character of these guys. Yes, the other one is family tradition, right? I alluded to that. A lot of people join the military because of family. Right? They had someone in their family. So I don't know if you ever thought about joining the military, but people have probably, you know, in your family, if you have people in the military, it's like, okay guys, we know how it works. Come on, let's do it together. You know? Yeah. So I alluded to military law. There are laws for everything in the military. Law. There's a law. You can be there. Here's the other thing. Laws apply at all hours of the day. You can't just take the uniform off. If you're in the military, one of the things first thing that you're ingrained in is there's a right and a wrong to everything. Very black and white. Very black and white, right? The gray doesn't exist in the military. Just doesn't. The guys who've served a long time have a very hard time understanding that you can do that if you want. What do you mean? So, well, what's the right? Will I get in
Yes
trouble?
or no?
Yeah, but can I do that or not? You know, you'll always get it. Nope. Yes. Nope. You know, in the military. Nope. That's not how. That's the wrong answer. Well, you know, in our world though, and you know, outside of the military, that's not how the world works. It's just not black and white.
Right.
You can do a lot of things that maybe you shouldn't do. You can speed. You can do a lot of things that technically isn't the right thing to do, and
Nobody's gonna come
nobody's
after
gonna come after you. Right? The military, absolutely.
So they're
not.
very
If you see this in really tangible ways, drive on a post and go the speed limit is 25 miles an hour, go 26 miles an hour, you'll be pulled over.
Mhm.
Yep, and get a $150 ticket, 26 miles an hour.
Wow.
And you're like, what the heck? I can barely tell. What's the speed limit, man? 25 miles an hour, right? Here, they won't pull me over unless I'm over 10 miles, maybe 15 miles on the speed limit, right? Nope, not on a post. The law is the law, man, right? Hardcore.
Right.
You said you were going to do it, you signed this contract, you will do this. And so there's a definite sense of hard and fast rules. A lot of times people who grow up with military families or some of your clients may be very rigid like that.
Okay.
They may have very, this is right, this is wrong, especially if they
That's
spend
it.
a long time. That's how
Okay.
it works.
That's good to know.
Hard. Like, nope, you said you'd be here at 4, it's 4:10.
Okay, I
What the heck?
understand. Okay.
And we'll talk about that timeliness in a second. Yeah, actually, let's just talk about it now. That's another thing, timeliness. Part of the military law is this idea of on-timeness.
So
Holy
it's 4
moly.
o'clock, 4 o'clock.
When we say 4 o'clock, we actually, if you show up at 4 o'clock, you're late.
Just a few minutes till.
When I say 4 o'clock, I mean 15 minutes before 4 o'clock, right? A lot of the military culture is, people ask me sometimes, what if you're late for it all over sleep? It's like your flight that you can't miss. That's how it feels to be in formation. Like, I can't, I won't. What do you mean? You just won't. I don't understand. No, you make sure it doesn't happen. You have 6 alarms, you just don't stay up all night in your car in uniform, whatever it takes, you will not be late, and if you are, it's horrible, it's like,
They really make you.
yeah, you just, who
toilets
wants to
and
do
stuff.
5,000 push-ups and, it's like,
Yeah.
whatever it is, like, ugh, who wants to do that? So this is, that sense of timeliness is also really.
It stays with them
Yep.
and throughout
The
their
other thing
life.
is, do I have it on here? There's another part of this law part that I think is really interesting, and that is not just the early, or not just the rigidity in time, but also the early to rise thing. Often, in the military, your day just starts so early, and a lot of times people who spend a lot of time in the military, that never goes away, ever. In fact, it's really, I mean, I have to fight against it to sleep in, because I always naturally get up real early, and I just have to say, no, you don't always have to get up early, go to sleep. But in general, people who spend a lot of time in the military, they'll,
That's their schedule.
when I'm on active duty orders, for example, we do PT every morning at 05.
PT,
Physical training.
Training.
We do physical training and we have to be
5
there
a.m.
at 4:30 to stretch, 4:30 in the morning, and then work, and then, do a whole workout, 5:30 go for a run, done by 6:30, eat breakfast, be showered, breakfast, and then be in your classroom at 7 o'clock, and then, or be wherever you need to be at 7 o'clock.
Wow.
Yeah.
Everything is just.
Yeah, by the time you come noon, you're like, why am I so tired? And you're like, oh, right, because
I got up at 4 in the
it's
morning.
been an 8-hour day already. Jeez, and I still have the whole rest of the day to go.
Wow.
So there's that sense of, you work stuff in the morning. It's just, people who spend a lot of time in the military, especially some of your clients, that will have been ingrained in them, especially if you have some strong memories tied to war in early mornings. It's just ingrained in you,
Okay, well,
Used to their own morning.
thank you, it's good to know.
Yeah.
If I tell them I'll be there at 10, I better be there 10 to 10, right?
Yeah, well, not all, either, but in general, it's good to know that
Yes.
they could be very sensitive time, and that, what doesn't mean anything to you could mean something a lot more to them. They say, well, I don't know if you're very trustworthy, you can't,
Right.
Some
right.
people, you're
It's
communicating something
ingrained
that you
in
don't know you're communicating, at least to be aware, I could be communicating something here that I didn't need to communicate. The other one is chain of command. So, I've been in the military for a long time. I alluded to this earlier, but there's always here in the civilian world, we're not always aware of power, right? You sit at a table and you're not always aware of who's the one who has the most power and who we should, awareness of power. Not so if you're in the military. Absolutely not. You are instantly aware of rank structure. In your head, you can see who's over who and everyone. These are the officers, and then these are the
Well, they all
enlisted.
have
Everyone has a rank. If I walk after this, I have a meeting with a soldier, and if I go and I meet my soldier and I don't have he doesn't know me, and doesn't know my rank, it will be so uncomfortable for him. He will not have any idea what to call me, won't know how to, he'll just, hey,
Will you go home and change?
how's it going?
Or you're
No,
gonna
no,
go like that?
I would introduce myself with my
I
rank.
have a question.
Yep.
All chaplains or
Mhm.
that type of personnel are all officers, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So I'm an officer. I'm a captain, and so what that means is that all the enlisted call me sir, sir.
Sir.
Right. They would all call me sir, and then younger officers will call me sir as well. So what happens though is it's just the way that the chain of command works in the military is that you always call officers sir, or if it's a female, you call them ma'am. If they're anyone who's higher rank than you, if you're an officer, any officer that's higher rank than you, if you're enlisted, you would call, you might call someone if they're a sergeant and they're higher rank than you, call them sergeant, whatever their last name. If you're, I call soldiers private, specialist, whatever their rank is. And so it's a way of honoring their place. And so what's interesting though is without that chain of command, without that, the first thing that someone does when they look, it affects the way you view the world in the military. Because the first thing they're doing is they're not looking at anything but my rank.
Right.
Right? When I walk up, they have to see, they have to see like, oh gosh, the other thing is you have to salute, right? So you're walking past someone, am I gonna have to salute you? Oh, hey sir, how's it going? Right? You're always aware, conscious. It's not something, and if you haven't served in the military, you never think to be aware of this, but it's a hypersensitivity to who, even now, when I tell people that I'm a chaplain, if someone has been in the military for any amount of time, they can't stop calling me sir. I'm like, please don't call me sir. Call me Nathan. Okay, sir. And they don't feel right about it. No.
Well,
it's okay, sir.
they're conditioned to call you sir.
Yeah, and even though they're not military or whatever, it's like, no, sorry. Because so the reason I say that is because they're often, the military will see orders, chain of command, right? If someone was a sergeant major, some of your guys might have been at some point ranks, higher up or low, and they might still identify as that person, that rank. And so, you might benefit to know what rank they were. So, if you have a sergeant major, that means they've been in for 35 years and were in charge of a lot of soldiers and may treat you as such, right? And you can jokingly say, no, actually, I'm your battalion commander here, or I'm your something else. You can speak in their language that you can say, actually, I'm the officer here, so you can tell me what to do.
Is a sergeant major one step below warrant officer?
No, sergeant major is the highest enlisted rank you can go.
Warrant officers are not considered from the ranks up to becoming an officer?
It goes enlisted, that's right. So sergeant major, and then warrant officers are in between, and then general officer is here.
Yeah.
So there's 3, and I have a slide on that, but I can show you. The other thing that's really ingrained is this concept of mission. I don't know how ingrained this would be for older clients, but I know for guys who just transition out, the idea of mission is, it's so hard. It's like ingrained in you. The mission is the ultimate, that is the most important thing, right? If you serve the military, there is a goal, and we just don't characterize this in the civilian side. If I say, for example, hey, I need this TV off the wall and brought in the other room, essentially what that means is I don't care how you do it. I don't care what happens. I need that TV in the other room. And if in an hour I say, why isn't the TV off the room? You're like, oh, I didn't have a screwdriver.
That's not an excuse.
What? What was the mission? What exactly is happening? Right, it's all about mission.
Okay.
Is your arm cut off? Right? I don't care. You'll drag it, stump it. The mission comes first. And so often that's why sometimes you get huge responsibilities. Hey, we need you to do this. And you're like, that's going to steal my whole life, because it's not like you can say no. Right? I got a call recently from someone who said, hey, listen, from the state chaplain, said, hey, we need you to take over this brigade. It's a larger, I'd be in charge of a lot more guys. And I was like, well, I feel like normally you just assign me and then tell me I'm going. It feels kind of like you're asking. He goes, well, the only reason I'm asking is because I need you to get a couple of paperworks together before we can move you. And I'm like, That's funny. So you're not really asking. It's like
They're telling
Yeah.
you.
So the idea of mission, right? That we, in order to do this, we need to have this happen. So as an employee, for example, a veteran is amazing, right? You can say, "Hey, we need this done,"
They'll do it.
and they're like, "I will be here till the cows come home, till I get this mission done." Right? In a wartime environment, the mission is to take the objective. That's what's important, right? And the nature of war is that you'll lose things. You're going to lose time, sleep, people, health. It's going to happen, but the goal is the mission, and that is not characterized in the civilian side, right? It's like, well, I mean, sure, you said it was important, but
Right.
there's
Well, excuse me for interrupting, but guys that flew over in World War II, they always refer to it as their mission.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? How many missions did you go on?
Mhm.
18, 25.
Mhm.
Yeah, so,
Exactly. Yep, it's a way of understanding what you had to do. It's a frame for looking at the world, right? What's your mission here? And as such, actually, sometimes I bet a tangible way of working with your clients, it might be really helpful to, ask them what is their mission, right? To explore with them what's their mission now, right? Are they they have a mission? Is a mission, what's driving them? What are those goals? Because I guarantee you, if they spend any time in the military, that is still a frame for the way they operate in the world, right? A way of looking at it. Saying, you did all these missions, and now I'm curious, what's your mission now? That might be a tangible way of saying, figuring out, helping them have some point of hope or something in the future that they can hold on to. Yeah. So the other thing is there's these really strong values that are imbued into soldiers and service members. Really, one of the big ones is integrity, right? When I became an officer, I actually lived at OCS before I became a chaplain. And one of the things that we always like to say was, an officer will never lie, cheat, nor steal, nor tolerate those who do. Right? This deep sense of honesty, integrity. I will never lie, I will never cheat, and I will never steal, and I will never tolerate anyone who does that. Whoa! Right? There's that deep sense of integrity where you don't do wrong around. Right? There's a great sense of we want to, and now in the military laws they're downsizing any little thing, right? Oh, you lied, you're out. What? You can be written up and we can process you out. It's a great sense of integrity, and so often that will also be that's a huge value as well. Courage is a huge one for most people in the military. Courage, sense of really being courageous and putting willingness to die. That's the other one. I was just talking with a guy yesterday who served in the Persian, and he served in Vietnam too. But he was talking about how it's weird that once you get ready to die and you're prepared to die, you never are unprepared to die. There's a sense in you that once you've been in combat, he was saying, I feel like I'm prepared to die, and now I'm prepared to die. I can have a conversation. I can say, I'm prepared to die. I can be courageous because I'm ready to die. I've made my peace. And that's a different way of being, really profoundly serious. One thing that you notice about guys who've been in war is there's sometimes a seriousness that comes with life, a deep sense of protection, and really, sometimes it's scary a little bit. You're like, good Lord, you are really intense. I know.
I've watched a number of shows about vets coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. What they talk about is a sense of camaraderie, their relationship they had with their buddies.
Mm-hmm.
And it was amazing. They interviewed this one guy I'm thinking of. He was like a double amputee, and he says, if I could, I would go back. And not even that resignation, if I need to, I'll die for my buddy. I'll die for. Don't leave anybody behind. That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, so you actually looked at the next one. Teamwork is a big one, right? So military is extremely about us. We're, as a unit, you sing songs, you wear your patch, and it's like, I'm leaving the unit that I'm in now, and one of the have a patch that we're the Black Horse, the 1st 144 Field Artillery, the Black Horse, from a 11 regiment up in Fort Irwin. It's like a really pride, yeah, we're like Black Horse. And it's interesting because that's how we identify ourselves, right? Like everyone has Black Horse stuff, hats, handkerchiefs. We're like the Black Horse, and it's a way we do things as a unit. We do things. You know, we compete. It's a we, and this is often very difficult for guys when they transition out of the military because on the resume they say we shot 72 missions on this, and you're like, well, what did you do though? I mean, you didn't do it. What did you do? And most people will look at that and go, well, I have no idea what he's talking about. I didn't even say I once, or what? What do you mean? There's no what was happening. And to get, especially in an interview, it's very hard sometimes to like, oh no, it's a we thing, but you did some of these things. Yeah. And like, even still, like, well, yeah, but I could have done it without him. Right, but you still made that decision. Okay, fine. So there's definitely that camaraderie, and they say in war and battle, of course you fight for the mission, but actually at the end of the day, you fight for the guy to your left and your right. This is a warrior ethos. I will place the mission first. I'll never accept defeat. I'll never quit. I'll never long combat. They make you shout that 1,000 times. You can imagine. It's like that's the creed.
Instilled in you.
Sure. Some cultural differences. I alluded to some of these: cohesion, mission, devotion, chain of command. The one that I always like to highlight is the fluid and equal social relationships. Here, for example, Heather and I could have a professional relationship where, I invite her to come share something about JFS or wherever, and I could see you outside of this context, and it would be like, oh, how are you? Good to see you. In the military, it would not be that way. It would be kind of awkward. Might be without a uniform. I don't know if I would say hi or because I don't. It's like, yeah, we're not on duty. How do I act? It takes a long time to build relationships out of uniform.
Okay.
It's a lot harder because the relationships aren't fluid. You can't date an enlisted person. Like you can't. An officer cannot date an enlisted person. So there has to be like
Equal.
Yeah, they have to be
Can
equal.
an officer date another officer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they can't be in the same chain of command. So you can't date your boss.
I understand.
But there's all these rules, and relationships are just not. They're not fluid. It's like it's rigid. Everything's very rigid. And so here I might work for you one day, and then go over here, and it's always awkward if there will be no acknowledgement. I was enlisted for a long time. A lot of the people that I used to report to, I now am over, and there's never an acknowledgement that that's what happened. Right? It's just like I'm a new person now. And I'm like, well, I'm not. I knew you 3 years ago too. And they're like, okay, yes sir, yes sir. I'm like, no, we're never going to talk about this. Okay. It's just not fluid. In the National Guard and Reserve, we have a little bit more fluidity because we're civilian a lot more of
Most
the time.
of the time, yeah.
But in the active duty Army, no way. There was a strict divide between people you hang out with. And, on the lower levels of rank, sometimes it's a little more fluid, but once you get up, it's very rigid. People who are the same hang out with each other. It's really interesting. Each branch. Notice that when I talk about this, I think service members is one of the best ways to use because Army, if you've been in the Army, you're a soldier. If you're a Marine, you're a Marine. If you've been in the Air Force, you're a airman or airwoman. And if you're a National Guardsman, you're a Guardsman or Coast Guard. You're in reserve, you're a reservist. So there's all these things. One interesting thing about the military is that it's actually in recent years, it's become a professional fighting force. So this is one of the reasons why there's been such a divide between civilian and military connection because it's really become a much more professional fighting force. Now people stay in instead of, it used to be where you'd serve a time of service and then get out, and now people can stay in for a long time. And you stay on bases, and it's a small percentage of the population. So they're very isolated and it's sort of cut off from the overall general public. So the role is much different than it was, like for example, in a draft, like in Vietnam, where everyone was affected. Everyone knew people who were in war.
Right.
Yep. Yeah, my uncles, brothers, people are gone. Whereas now, I might not know. It's really easy to not know people. You know, I'm tangibly the only soldier that my friends know, and a lot of them. You know, it's interesting. Here's a list of the ranks, and you can see, just mostly to know interesting. Anyway, here's the enlisted, and there's the warrant officers and the general officers. We don't need to go into all that stuff, but essentially to know that there's an order, and that officers are always above enlisted. And there's a difference because officers are usually the decision makers, or the, if you can picture it, they're the people at the table who are making all the decisions about how the unit will run, and then the enlisted people are the ones who are actually doing it all. And so if you can picture it, we call enlisted the backbone of the Army, right? They're the ones who get the beans and the bullets and make sure everything happens. Then there's the officers who sit around, and you know the joke is that if you call an enlisted person an officer, he says, "I work for a living." So yeah, obviously there's lots of symbols for all of, you know, a lot of symbology, culture, ritual. There's a way of walking, talking. There's a whole ritual. Uniform has to be perfect. There's a way of demonstrating your service. That's just the way it goes. Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines all have their own taglines, and as you can see, they're all different uniforms. This won't really be that relevant to you guys because they're, you know, your clients will have served a long time ago. Just to know that they're different. Acronyms, you know, that's the other thing. To be comfortable with acronyms in the military, we just have so many acronyms. Like any organization, you just get used to shortening everything. The military is infamous for it. In fact, what's funny is when you go from one unit to another unit and they have all the same acronyms that mean all different things, and you're like, "What? I thought these were the same words." And you're like, "What?" And you know, a lot of times everyone just assumes that acronyms mean stuff. You're like, "Whoa, what does that mean again?" And it's like the emperor's new clothes when we come to the military. They're always giving you acronyms and then assuming that everyone knows. And sometimes I think, does anyone know what that one means? A lot of times soldiers know, like AIT. A lot of soldiers know what AIT is, but they don't know what it stands for. And so AIT is Advanced Individual Training. It's the school. It's the school you go to after basic training to specialize in your training. So people would know what an AFSC, which is the same thing, AIT for Air Force. They would know what it is, but they don't know what it stands for.
Right.
So a lot of the acronyms, they'd be like, "Well, you know, my MOS," and you're like, "MOS." An MOS is a military occupational specialty, or their job, essentially, in the military. Their MOS. But they may not know what it stands for. MOS, I don't know, my job. Right? They don't. So a lot of the acronyms represent something, but they wouldn't necessarily, because they're used all the time.
And like AIS, like with the Navy, when I worked for France, they always just called it A school. Like, oh yeah, I'm at A school.
Yeah.
And you're like,
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Yeah, training. I mentioned training, assignments. I'm going to go to the. One interesting point, this might actually affect you, is the discharge status is really important. So a lot of times in Vietnam, a lot of the guys were getting bad conduct discharges because they were demonstrating a lot of signs of PTSD or fighting against the war or whatever. And so what happens is then they are disqualified from all benefits of the VA. So some of your clients may or may not actually have had that experience. The other thing that we find with World War II and Vietnam vets is some of them don't identify as veterans. They may say they've served in the military, but they don't actually identify as veterans. So I've had this conversation many times. They're like, "I'm not a vet." I'm like, "When did you serve?" "Well, I just served in the Persian War, for 3 years." I'm like, "I promise you're a vet." "Nah, I think you're wrong." So I'm not. I'm like, "Yes, you are a vet. You can go to the VA and get free health insurance." "Wow, really?" Yes. What are you using? Wow, man, like $800 a month for health insurance. I'm on Medicare. I'm like, all right, listen, let's get you VA, and I promise it'll be way easier. Oh, wow, hey. They do that surgery I've been waiting for forever. So that's a tangible way. Sometimes discharges too. There's legal clinics that will change discharges. So if one of your clients, for example, had a bad experience or got discharged or got felony, something happened where it was a bad discharge, which in Vietnam was happening all the time. And I don't know the percentages, but a number of our homeless vets here in LA have bad conduct discharges because they don't get any benefits. And if you have a dishonorable discharge, it's like having a felony on your record. Because
Do
we're trying to
they,
get a
do you
job.
have advocates for them to get it upgraded to?
I mean, they didn't. In the past, they didn't. There was no one. You could fight all day, no one. And now they're changing a lot of them, but, 10 years of being homeless because you can't.
They're already adjusted to being
Yeah, now you're
homeless.
like, well, I'm homeless. And you're like, well, no, we can change this. And they're like, right. So now there's a bunch of legal clinics that's trying to do this here in
Well,
LA.
that's good, that's good.
But to have that on your radar, because some of your clients may, have had a situation like that, and especially if healthcare is a huge issue, they could easily go to the VA.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Especially the World War II vets. There's World War II. A lot of the older guys, they were in World War II. Or Vietnam. Good Lord. They're all entering into that caretaking age in Vietnam. That's a tangible way that you could say, did you ever serve in Vietnam? Yeah, it sucked. 3.5 years. You're like, have you ever registered with the VA? Oh, I never got in there. The government.
Oh, they have to register with
Yeah, they have to go to the VA,
Okay.
register, and then,
It's interesting, I had called up about benefits to the VA. It was during George W.'s administration.
Okay.
And this gal stopped me at the get-go. She says, when were you in? I said, 57 to 61. You don't qualify. I said, excuse me? She said, you could thank George Bush for that. Now, I have no idea if she was just in a bad mood, if that was really true. So I didn't pursue it.
So try it again.
I don't want any benefits from the vets now, but at the time, I was just kind of curious about whether I could get in there. I'm on Medicare. That's great.
Well, yeah, it's good to at least be aware that there is, they've much, in the sea of goodwill, we were riding it right now. There will be a day where that sea of goodwill goes away. Right now, it's like, oh my gosh, we've been to war. We need to open the floodgates and just sort of say, all right, vets, let's care for you. We sent you away. We should definitely care for you. Something to be aware of. It affects all sorts of stuff. We have a wrong discharge. This is kind of a rough estimation. In our country, about 8% of the population is a vet. So, you have 10 clients, one of them will probably do that. Here in LA, probably a higher chance than that. We have about 37 million spouses. I've done a lot of work as a chaplain, I've done a lot of work with faith communities and working with improving veteran community, improving their capacity with working with veterans. And one thing they often don't think about is just asking if people have served in military veterans. And I've heard a lot of the guys, some of the pastors, and one rabbi recently was saying, if I ask who served in the military, it's amazing, or who lives with someone who served in the military, how many hands go up? And it's like, geez. The clergy had no idea that this is on the radar. Like, wow, look at this. War has been affected so much more than I really thought. So I want to go over some of the transition challenges. Mostly, I want to say this about transition challenges. Your job is not going to be like this professional, but as a transition, to know all the challenges that can affect veterans. But to essentially that with all the awareness of PTSD and all of this stuff that's going on out there, often there's a stigma that every vet has PTSD and that, oh my gosh, we are dealing with a crisis of the world. Now, it is, I say this as someone who's spent a better part of my life and will be spending a better part of my life stemming this issue, but only about 20% of those who go to war come back with some sort of diagnosis of PTSD. Some studies might even say up to 40, but the truth is the majority of people who go to war and who serve in the military have no diagnosis, have no PTSD of any kind, right? They find the resources and the family and the community to be able to process back in and adjust their experience in war back into normal.
But they may have had issues before they went in.
Yeah, and so some of them may have had
They
it.
can't cope or whatever the
Yeah,
problem.
but the majority of those who go, almost 80%, are fine. Right? Go to war, have their experiencing heroin experience, whatever it is, and then transition back and make use of their experience. And so that should be the frame for all of this. These are transition challenges, and many of your clients may have served in the military, and it was just an awesome experience and cool. Right? There's no transition challenge at all.
Yeah,
It's like,
they
yeah, it
come
was
back.
suck getting back home, but my wife and I went to counseling and figured it out, and man, ever after, we just are more in love than ever, you know? Got 8 babies to prove it. Whatever, right? And you're like, yay! The other thing is that that transition, the nature of war pulls a service member from their family and then puts them back in. And by, I mentioned this earlier, that a family will just do this naturally. They will learn to survive without the parent, and then when that parent comes in, they have to open it back up and allow the parent to come back in and then readjust to the parent. And that is hard. That is always hard. Sometimes some of your clients may have grandkids or kids that they can help process that experience with, or help encourage their family to say, listen, we have to fight to create space again now that he's back. He or she is back. We have to
Open your arms better.
yeah, and be willing to change, and the hardest part, learning to be with kids again, and the kids to need you again. I don't need you anymore, right? That's essentially what it is. I've been count sessions with families, and I'm like, honey, I don't need you anymore. I'm good. And he's
You've
like,
learned to adjust without it.
heck yeah.
Always
I've
bad.
been gone for a few years. It's painful. I don't. If you've ever spent a lot of time away from someone you love, it's painful. Right? You're someone you're used to being around. Even when I go away for 2 weeks, by about the week mark, I'm like, jeez, man, I'm tired. I always feel like I'm always looking for my wife to tell me not to say something or something. She's not here.
Then we're already
For me to go. So I say that because there's always transition challenges, but the majority of people are able to get through those. We don't have to do videos. Here's a kind of list of the individual challenges. In recent years, we've really put a big stressor on the fact that PTSD on the 3 in the middle there, MST, PTSD, and suicide. Suicide rates now are at an all-time high. Really, about 22 vets a day commit suicide. I unfortunately have been very close to this. It's really a serious issue. There's a lot of reasons for it. It's hard to get your head around it. But we're just seeing really high rates of suicide from a lot of different levels. People who've served in wars, and I think part of another part of that issue is the military sexual trauma. Many female vets, the skyrocket rates for female veterans. Female veterans who have experienced military sexual trauma. So if you can picture the trauma that it is to serve with people and then to be violated by someone who you're supposed to be able to trust with your life, it's horrifying. And then obviously post-traumatic stress disorder, where a lot of it is late onset, so you don't necessarily come home and then say you're having issues right away. It takes a while to start having problems, and it's only when you have a nervous breakdown in Target that you're like, okay, wait a minute,
Something's wrong.
What's the difference between combat stress and PTSD in terms of the symptoms?
So similar, except combat stress is really the direct reaction of being operating on high levels, little sleep, high stress. It often looks like anxiety, like it looks like when you get really stressed, but
But don't people with PTSD exhibit that also?
yeah. So except that it's combat stress is like an immediate. Combat stress usually happens in an immediate function. So after you've been in a firefight, you've been burned out. There's a sense of you can have a recovery. Post-traumatic
It exhibits
stress.
itself back in civilian life or back when they're back home, that would then be
Well, yeah, in PTSD, when we talk about PTSD, we talk about symptomology that's happened longer than 30 days.
Longer than what?
30 days.
Okay.
The new DSM changed things, but roughly it's happened longer over time. So what's happened? So when we talk about post-traumatic stress, with D, essentially we're talking about everyone has normal reactions to stress and to trauma. If you engage in a traumatic reaction, right, we'll all be shaky or panicked or all those normal feelings. It's just in PTSD, it doesn't go down, it doesn't decrease. We don't find a way to release it, and it stays in us, and then it builds and causes a lot of other symptomology. We start losing sleep and a lot of that stuff. And all of these are really normal reactions to stress and to traumatic injury of some kind. But specifically, these are a lot of the stressors that we see with military clients who are coming back, and it's challenging, right? It's super challenging, especially when you're dealing with issues like suicide, because it's such a final answer to really often temporary situations, and it's.
Is there a percentage of how many commit suicide?
You mean of all veterans? You mean?
No, yes.
I don't know if we have those percentages, but the VA just had the reports about 22 a day. It's a lot. It's horrible. So it's something to be aware of, and that I don't know. Do they get any kind of suicide prevention training?
We talked about that, yeah.
Okay, yeah, and just to have some basic referral sources, and to not be afraid to ask about suicide, and whether someone has a plan, and that there's nothing to be afraid of. That they show that asking about suicide doesn't encourage suicide at all. Someone is not suicidal. Asking them if they are suicidal doesn't make them suicidal.
Okay.
Right. So if you're like, "Are you suicidal?" They're like, "No, but now I am." That doesn't happen.
Okay.
Right? If you can't scare people away, like, they don't just die on the ground.
Okay.
They, in general,
It's already in.
yeah, it's already there. If they are suicidal, and you ask them, then they say, "Well, actually, I've been thinking about that." You want to know that,
Yes,
right?
definitely.
And you say, "Well, do you have a plan?" Actually, yeah, or no, not yet, but I've been thinking about it a lot. You're like, "Well, let's get you some help." And, but don't be afraid of that. That's a great. I unfortunately ask that question all the time, awkwardly. I hate that question. It's so dumb. I wish I never had to ask it. I hate it. Sometimes I'm like, gotta ask you. Are you feeling hurt yourself? Yeah. And then, so combat. One interesting thing about these wars, particularly, is that 80% of soldiers 79% said they shot at the enemy. That is significantly higher than other wars. Way higher. And about 62% had an IED explode near them, and about a little less than half had killed the combatant. So they had killed the combatant. So that is a lot of exposure. If you think about the millions of people who have been overseas, a lot of people have fired that weapon, and a lot of people have been actively engaged in the enemy, which is different. And it's presented obviously a lot of challenges, right, in these wars. You won't particularly warfare looks different. That's not really as recent. So some of the common, I mentioned, we all have common reactions to trauma, right? We all remember, after trauma, we have all these experiences, right? We re-experience it, we feel aroused when we think about it. If you've ever had a really traumatic event or an assault or something happens, when you think about it, sometimes your heart starts beating fast and you feel aroused and oh gosh, you might get hurt, and then occasionally it hurts. If you had a car accident that was really traumatic, every time you go over the curb, you wince a little bit. Those
No.
common human reactions, and what these are all common reactions, and what PTSD is just when it stays prevalent and it doesn't go away, and it gets stuck, but you don't have the resources to be able to.
These will go away.
But normally,
Senior people.
you have it, but if something happens, for example, where they start demonstrating some of those symptoms, and it is related to something that they may be experiencing, it's good to know, right? And to be able to process and say, hey, listen, let me get you some resources. You can talk to somebody and help process this, rather than just sit here and quietly suffer. I think that's about it. I think that's what we'll call. Yeah, we kind of went over that.
Can we look at that PTSD for a second?
Yeah. So this is more or less the same. This is the PTSD symptoms. So there's difficulty concentrating, hyperarousal. This is the combat. As you can see, it's pretty similar to combat operational stress. This is just over. This specifically are things that are affecting one's function or quality of life for a certain amount of time. And then I mentioned MST that Veteran Self-Administration did about 1 in 5 women in the military were experienced some sort of military sexual trauma. So that's a lot, actually, a lot. And that's, that's who's taking that, who's doing that, that's a lot, Yeah. We talked about transition challenges, healing challenges, and we talked about all this stuff. Last thing is, I always like to end on the idea of community. So I honestly think that part of our role in society and community is to engage and to own the processes of war. We have a duty to care for people who we've sent to war. And so as a community, we can educate ourselves and we can willingly allow ourselves to be listeners to stories of war. We can willingly actively put ourselves in places where we're able to be affected by the cost of war. Often most of us want to go, oh no, I don't want to feel it. I'm so sorry for you guys. Here's $5 or something. But it's our job as a community to share the burden of war and not let 1% of the population feel the burden of it. And the things that happen in war, shouldn't just be stuck. And they should, as a country, we should own war. And I think in process that will help us in our policy, that will help us in all around if we feel the cost of war as a democracy, as a republic.
I wanted to share something with you. I was watching a TV program, I think it was 60 Minutes, and they were talking about the change in Israelis in large cities dealing with, like when they're fighting Hamas, or when they're having their incidents with Hezbollah. And they showed they have this iron, I forget what they call it, this like an umbrella of missiles that knock out rockets. And they show these people sitting on the street drinking coffee or whatever. You can see the explosions going up in the air, and they're talking about how impervious they were to what was really going on. The only thing that I really sensed us getting together uniting was 2001, and that was a relatively short-lived thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. A good part of that is the shift to a professional fighting force and the isolation of those who serve. Right? We don't experience it, and you don't know any veterans. You don't hear any stories of war, and you don't see any of the signs of war. How are you supposed to be affected by it, right? That's why I think as a community, it's our job we have to create space for these war stories. We have to create welcoming conversations. We as communities have to say, are there veterans among us? We'd like to do something. We want to create space to share in the burden as painful.
More than once a year on Veterans Day.
Right, absolutely. And if we want to do Veterans Day, then we need to take it really seriously as a society, right? If we want to do it, great.
But in
Veterans Day,
certain
but-
cities, they have banners of the person that joined the Army, the Navy, whatever. And they'll have a banner with their name on it, and I applaud them, you know.
And that is a start, but it's
not
to
enough.
really push it to like a solemn, to a place where it's like an honor, you know, where we all gather as a community and say this is, you know, we should all share in this. It's not about thanking people for their service. That's not what Memorial Day is supposed to be about, right? It's supposed to be about an honoring that we all share the burden of war, right? We memorialize those who didn't make it back and who we lost, but that it affects all of us, period, right? It's not just about, hey, thank you for your service, you know, we like to make it this patriotic thing, but it's actually, hey, listen, as a country, we do, you know, otherwise all the decision makers continue to be unaffected by the costs of war, and then we stay in war and we do things that, you know, we don't know, because, you know, the only thing we know about is what we're watching on CNN and Fox News, and, you know, we're like, it's not gonna work.
No, it's limited.
So, yeah, so essentially, some of the implications here, right? Largely, you know, policy decrease the stigma for veterans, that instead we approach it from a community perspective. And we understand that, listen, as a community, we have to share in this, and that it's not just, you know, provide for you guys to make sure you have a list of resources for referral, right? I'm sure the Legacy Report will help you with that, but you know, when you get something that comes up and you know how to refer and say, listen, it sounds like you need to talk to somebody, you know, mental health person or somebody else, let's get you connected, or it sounds like maybe we can get you connected to the VA, or whatever it is that you're able to refer.
Now, the VA has therapy for people that were in the Vietnam War
Yeah,
and World War
absolutely.
II as well.
Yeah, the whole thing. Yeah.
Okay.
And not just VA, there's a lot of resources. Soldiers Project, there's a lot of different places that do this. So,
Okay.
yeah, and
So if they
you know,
have
just
any
to begin to
issues,
build.
you know.
Yeah, and you know, things come up that you feel are over your head. You know, just make sure that you have referrals and say, let me get you. I don't know if I feel comfortable doing that, but I can find somebody who could.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Just more of a comment. There's a lot of documentation that a lot of guys coming back from Iraq and from Afghanistan don't even know of the services are available, or that when they do apply, that they're kind of like brushed off to the side. I mean, I don't know that that's sensationalism on the part of the media. Maybe it is to some degree, maybe it isn't. But, you know, when you think about what it's like for these guys to come back and try to make the adjustment and letting go of all of that they encountered, and then to reach out to the Veterans Administration and to be brushed off to the side, or it takes 6 months to get services. It seems to me that you got to look at the top. You know, it's from the top down, really. What can we do in here? We could like be aware of signs and make referrals, but in general, I think I got to tell you the truth. I'm a little ashamed of the Veterans Administration. I really am.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, here in West LA, the average wait time, I think it's 385 days from the time you submit.
How many?
385 days from the time you submit your claim to get your benefits.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
So, you know, they just have a long. The truth is, no one was prepared for the level of need that this war would cause, and they certainly were not. And so, in mental health professionals, one of the reasons we started the military social work program was that they just didn't have the. They just were overwhelmed. You know, instantly you had guys who. I know a few years ago, 2 years ago, I had a friend who was a caseworker over there, and she had 42 people on her caseload. And it was like, what? What kind of care can you give to 42 people that you're supposed to be meeting with? Yeah, right. You know, like a caseload of 25 is stressful. 42? That's like, I can't. I'm lost.
And these people have
you know?
PTSD.
Yeah, or issues, transition issues,
Whatever.
or who are they're case managing, so they need help getting appointments or whatever, following up with, and it's just wasn't working. So I say all this, they're trying to fix it, but
Do you believe that?
I think so. I mean, they keep firing VA work in there. We work a lot with the West LA VA, and they're trying. I mean, the truth is, though, the reason I think community is the answer is because the VA cannot deal with all of this. It just can't. Honestly, the scale is too large, and 40% of people even go to the VA when they return. I still have never registered for the VA, right? For me, it's like, well, shoot, I have insurance. Like, I have a counselor. I don't need the VA. And I have lots of friends who are that way. And, one time I went and waited 6 hours, and they moved my appointment, and I was like, I'd rather pay $50 than do it on my own, honestly.
You asked me earlier about, maybe I should go back and inquire again. Another way of looking at it is if I'm taking up space and somebody else that needs it more than I do is taking up space.
Classic vet response. that is
Oh, yeah.
almost all vets that I know say that. They're like, well, I'd rather have someone else who needs it more than me, which is a classic. Every vet I know says, well, probably other people need it more than me. The thing is that, not necessarily, and you have to let them make that decision. Sometimes you might, the truth is it's a service that you deserve and you earned, and it's our duty as a country to provide that service. And the thing is, though, is from a community perspective, we have to be able to provide. The majority of people who are coming back with the Soldiers Project are seeing civilian providers. They're seeing civilian counselors. They don't want anything to do with the VA. And so one of the reasons the VA is being contracting now is because they're contracting to other places that are not the VA. So you don't have to go.
That's a step in the right direction.
Right. They're saying, okay, well, fine. Every veteran you see will pay for. Every veteran you see will pay for. Like, going that route, but still, it's.
And finding the funding for it.
Yeah.
The insurance funding.
Yep, and they have that. It's just, it's like I said, there's the scale. No one was ready for the scale, right? And especially here in LA, we just, the number of claims, just the massive number of claims, and VA uses all paper,
Well,
It's crazy.
I kind of look at it as we're slow learners because when you think of what all the people went through with Katrina, and then you got Sandy, same response time, same thing, maybe a tiny bit better. But you tell that to somebody that's sitting out there with no home, lost everything. It's like, when do we put a priority on it?
Well, right now there's the Gold Card Initiative, veteran that Obama put that veterans receive benefits first at work source centers, and the Sea of Goodwill is it's very different in Vietnam in this way. I don't know that we learned that many lessons, but one thing we are getting right is that Sea of Goodwill that people are saying, oh man, let's help veterans. They're not, in Vietnam it was mixed feelings, right? Like, wow, whatever. Now it's much more like, hey, we need to do something. There's outcry, there's people, President Michelle Obama has a huge initiative for the veterans, hire a vet, here to hire. There's a lot of stuff out there. Just 2 years ago, the unemployment rate for vets was near 26% or something.
Yeah.
Here in LA, it was massive. Now it's gone down to overall, I think it's below the average, or close to the average. Close to the average for LA, I think. Young vets are still really highly unemployed, like 25%. But we're still, it's a massive scale of an operation, and not to mention the number of homeless vets here in LA. That's this. We sort of had to pick one poison, and I think here in LA we said homeless vets. That's the one that is the most violating to conscience.
Totally agree.
Let's do it. And so, we had 80,000 homeless people here in LA, and roughly about a third of those were thinking of homeless. And so we said, let's get them. So they have outreach guys under bridges trying to get these guys into shelters. And, it takes a whole heck of a lot of work to get someone who's been chronically homeless.
But I volunteered for there's an organization called the Crystal Center.
Yeah, of course.
And I was with them when they were first getting started. And a lot of the guys that came in were vets. You know, a lot of them, I'm not saying the majority, but I'm saying a lot of them work. And, you know how they work, they try to get you back on
Yeah.
your feet.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, it's going to take work, and you know, I think especially from all levels, it's what it requires. So, well, thank you guys for your time, and I
Well, thank
I
you.
hope I got you
I've
thinking
learned a
little
lot,
bit.
yes.
I hope you learned a little bit
No,
something
it's-
along the way.
Always interesting. There's so much to the military that I think most of us don't know.
Oh, fine. Not if we haven't been there.
Exactly.